Recognizing a quorum, I am calling this meeting of the Cannabis Control Commission to order at 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, March 27th, 2018. Can I ask, can everybody hear me? Thank you. Can I ask anybody recording this meeting? Let the public be put on notice this meeting is being recorded. Can I ask everybody please to put your cell phones on silent? Thank you. That includes the commission. Just a few comments before we jump into the agenda. I anticipate a relatively short meeting today. Mostly we are heads down getting ready to open for business on Monday. And I think our executive director's report will give us an update on where we stand, but I think we are in good shape to start accepting applications for priority certification on Monday as committed. Our final regulations have been promulgated, if I am correct, and so we're going to have a little sandwich celebration in the commission this afternoon after the meeting, just to celebrate that accomplishment. I think that's all the time we can afford to take, is to go gobble down some sandwiches and get back to work. Just to set a couple of announcements before we get started. One is I wanted to introduce the newest senior member of the commission who joined us yesterday and came back for work today, which is always a good thing. So where's David? David Lakeman? Sean, would you introduce David to the group, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joining us yesterday, as you indicated, it was David Lakeman. He is our new Director of Government Affairs. David comes to us most recently as a legislative analyst for the Massachusetts Municipal Association, and prior to that served in a legislative liaison capacity for various agencies within the state of Illinois. So we are very glad to have David. We will keep him very busy, and also starting Monday, he, like everybody else, is part of the licensing team. So,
and you're going to go through the roles that each of us are going to play in that process, correct?
That's right. Yep.
Okay, David, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Nice to have you on board.
I'm excited to get started.
One other thing I just wanted to talk about. So we have accomplished an enormous amount in the 6+ months that we've been in business, getting our final regulations promulgated and getting ready to start processing certification applications, priority certification applications on Monday. We have made it a tradition to acknowledge the contributions of members of the Commission in hitting the milestones that we've hit so far and accomplishing what I think is an enormous amount of work. And I want to continue that, but I also want to kind of reiterate one thing that I think doesn't get iterated enough, which is the way the law is structured. We all have roles, but everything goes through the executive director, and nothing gets done without the executive director. And Sean has had his fingers in pretty much everything that we've accomplished since he joined us 2 months into our history, and continues to drive us to what I think is an amazing amount of work, accomplishment, and in a process that I'm very proud of. So I just wanted to acknowledge, once again, I know I've done this before, but I just think it's appropriate to reiterate the role that Sean has played in getting the commission to where we are. So thank you very much for that, Sean. I didn't ask for that. Seriously, well deserved, well deserved. So when you stop blushing, I think the agenda is going to move to you now. Actually, we have some things to do before the agenda. So other than my comments, we want to go through minutes from previous meetings. We got a relatively late start circulating these, so there are 2 sets of minutes, February 20th, 2018 and March 15th, 2018. Let me ask the Commission, are we ready to review one or both of those? Okay, so let's start with the 20th, February 20th, 2018. Are there any comments or suggested changes? Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Let the record show Commissioner Doyle made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Flanagan. All in favor of approving the minutes from February 20, 2018?
Aye.
Let the record show that unanimously we approve those minutes. The next set of minutes comes from March 15th, 2018. Any questions or comments? Suggested changes? Okay. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Let the record show Commissioner Flanagan made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Doyle. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Let the record show that the Commission unanimously approved the minutes from March 15, 2018. And once again, our thanks to Mary Alice for getting us to this point. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the Executive Director's Report. So, Sean, if you'll take over from here.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. one item that I had hoped to bring before the commission today, but I will hope now to bring next week. As you know, there was a previous discussion about the long-term facilities and headquarters of the commission. I am optimistic that we'll be able to bring an RFP to the commission for your feedback and approval at next week's meeting. And my expectation is that either at next week's meeting or future meeting shortly thereafter to also bring an RFP, a separate RFP for a satellite office as well.
Okay.
We are actively working with DCAM in developing the information necessary to promulgate and to fulfill each criteria for that RFP. They really drive the bus on the actual procurement, so we're trying to make sure we can meet their requirements to actually fill that document in. So we're underway. I was hopeful to get it today, but I will be unable to do that today. So next week.
Apologize for putting you on the spot, but given our lease in our current facility expires May of 2019,
May of
if I'm correct,
2019, that's correct.
what's kind of the drop dead date to have an RFP approved, in your opinion?
Approved by the commission, I would say mid to late April.
Okay.
And we won't lose the timeline that I presented previously with DCAM's assistance. It didn't have a lot of cushion or slack in it, and we are a bit behind as far as that's concerned. But I'm optimistic that as we narrow a search area, that'll narrow the volume of responses we get, and therefore allow us to be much more agile in visiting locations, as well as identifying the potential needs for build out of any future space. So I'm still optimistic.
Thank you.
The next item on my report, actually I will get back to B. So the workflow for application processing is probably the biggest piece, so I'll quickly hit on our current openings and our staffing. So we have 4 openings currently. There are in various stages. So we had previously posted a fiscal specialist, which the commission approved at a recent meeting, as well as a digital director. Those I was hopeful to close as of this week, but given that they have not been posted to the Mass Careers website, I'm choosing to extend that through April 6th. So they are available, the job descriptions and postings are available on our website, and they should be added to the Mass Careers page shortly. Similarly, we are posting, I just checked, one is on the Mass Careers page right now, it's for executive assistant. We'll also be posting a receptionist position. Those will be put on our website as well as Mass Careers. All of those 4 positions are closing on April 6th. We had 2 positions close Wednesday of last week, a director of community outreach and a constituent services director. We had a high volume of applicants, which is great, and we now have to undertake the effort of sifting through those applicants, identifying folks to interview and get that process underway. So that's kind of a quick update on where we are for staffing. As you noticed or indicated, we had David Lakeman starts, which is a very exciting step for us. So the next item is the workflow for application processing. And what I've tried to provide you in a slide is a real, I think, real high level, but perhaps messy example of what steps will be necessary for an applicant to apply for certification. And you see there's 2 different flows here, but they're very similar as far as process. So for an RMD to apply for certification, and let me, I guess, explain the slide a bit. If the box is not colored in, it's an optional step. So we're trying to capture information about these folks, but it's not required to move on to the next step. If it's filled in with the green color, it is something we are requiring as a field. So we'd like to know the company's name, and because it's not required, because these business entities may be in a version or a phase of converting their business entity from not-for-profit to for-profit. Any sort of identifying information through the Secretary of State or tax ID numbers. A key criteria is the key contact. Who is the primary contact for this application that we can be in touch with? Also trying to identify their key people. The DPH info is primarily if you are at some step or phase in your certification process, whether it be final or provisional, what is that identification, whether it be a license number or some sort of proof of that. Disclosure of any conflicts that you may have with the commission, whether it be a commission staff member or a commissioner, reviewing all that information, and then finally submit. So I don't want to simplify or oversimplify the process, but it really is intentionally simple. And we are also working with the Department of Public Health to make sure that we are able to share information with them, get information from them to verify all of this information. The next piece, the next applicant pool is going to be economic empowerment applicants. We're really trying to capture the same information, which is the company name, if there is one, any sort of corporate information that might be available through the Secretary of State's office, the primary contact for this application, any key people. And those key people could be employees, subcontractors, or owners of the entity that may be identified at this point. And then in this piece, the qualification aspect is three of the 6 criteria that are laid out in our regulations. And I can talk in more depth about those. Again, the disclosure of any conflicts, reviewing all that information, and clicking submit. So on the criteria piece, which I think is probably the meatiest of the application, there are several components that we are asking applicants to fill in. So to fulfill or be eligible for a certification, you need to meet 3 of the 6 criteria. We are going to ask applicants to fill in all 6 of those criteria. If the criteria is not applicable, it's simply click the radio button that says not applicable and move on to the next step. The intent of doing that is to, 1, get information in order to help us ascertain if this applicant is eligible for certification. So for instance, if there are 3 criteria that are met, but you're able to meet 4 or 5, that's going to really help us ensure that this applicant can be certified. Really, in the reason for that, the justification for that, is that I think this commission has really taken an affirmative step to encourage participation. And we want to make sure that we are able to meet that policy where if 3 of the criteria maybe not abundantly clear to us, if there's 4 to 5, that makes our role a lot easier in recommending that applicant for certification. So as you may recall, the 6 different criteria are majority of ownership belongs to people who have lived for 5 of the preceding 10 years in an area of disproportionate impact as determined by the Commission. Majority of ownership has held 1 or more previous positions where the primary population served were disproportionately impacted, or where primary responsibilities included economic education, resource provision, or empowerment to disproportionately impacted individuals or communities. C, or number 3, is at least 51% of your current employees or subcontractors reside in areas of disproportionate impact, and by the first day of business, the ratio will meet or exceed 75%. Option 4, or D in the regs, at least 51% of employees or subcontractors have drug-related CORI and are otherwise legally employable in cannabis enterprises. E, majority of ownership is made up of individuals from Black, African American, Hispanic, or Latino descent. And F, or the final criteria, is kind of a catch-all, which is other significant articulable demonstration of past experience in or business practices that promote economic empowerment in areas of disproportionate impact.
So I'm not sure whether you're going to cover this or not, but what kind of documentation are we requiring for each of those criteria?
Sure, and so that was I was going to get to next, which
Sorry.
is for some, no documentation. We're not asking for documentation. For others, we are asking, the system will have the ability for someone to upload a document, be it a doc or a PDF. In some cases, for instance, if the 51% of employees, it could be an affidavit, it could be some sort of notarized document, it could be an organizational chart, a staffing plan, something to help us understand what your employee mix and your employee head count is. Other things, for instance, if you have, we are going to ask for, if you resided in an area of disproportionate impact for 5 years, an address, some sort of proof of that, and any sort of evidence that you could provide us supporting that. And then obviously the final piece, the being that kind of catch-all, is some sort of narrative. If there's a story to be told or something that you want to kind of use or input to defend your assertion that you meet that criteria. So in some cases there is a delineated list of materials that we're asking for, so maybe that's affidavit or an organizational chart. In other areas it might just be not so much open-ended, but the ability of the applicant to give us something. I would stress that we're not looking to secure anything that might be private or personally identifiable information that you wouldn't. This is a secure system, but at the same time, we're developing public records as well. So we want to be careful and mindful of not getting materials that would rise to the level of us, I guess, being. So a good example, perfect example, we're not looking for CORIs. We're asking folks not to provide us those. So instead, we're looking for information from the applicant of who those employees are that may have a drug-related CORI in their past, and some sort of, not so much evidence, but materials that, or fill in the kind of blank fields that can help us ascertain what that drug-related charge might be. So that is naturally, I think, the economic empowerment applicant piece, because of these 6 criteria. We're collecting a bit more information from folks. It's not as, I guess, the relationship we have with DPH, I think, is going to allow us to capture information with a bit of ease. The staff is really going to be focusing on, as the economic empowerment piece, again, with focusing on how to get folks through this process in order to encourage them or work them through this process to encourage certification. So I'm happy to take any sort of questions you may have at this point, or I can certainly talk more about
I have one more, and I'm sure the others do as well. Can you or Dave just give us an update on the licensing technology?
Sure. I can give you, I guess, a quick update. We are remain confident that this system will go live on Monday. As far as rolling the system out, as I indicated at a previous meeting, the April 2nd will start the certification process. April
16th.
I'm actually thinking 17th because 16th is Patriots Day. And I want to be mindful of the amount of hard work that's going on at the commission, and make sure that folks, and I also want to make sure that when we launch this, folks are in the office to take phone calls and kind of triage things. So that, I apologize if there's any confusion, but April 16th being Patriots Day, we would intend to go live with all application license types for those certified priority applicants. Still keeping on task with May 1st and June 1st, although I will confirm that those aren't weekends. So we'll certainly be putting more information out about that process. I can certainly come back to the commission and do a similar process for licensure for application types. And we're also planning to put a lot of guidance and screenshots and fields that need to be filled out during the course of this week. And I guess that our intention is to roll this out in a really thoughtful way. Today's discussion, I think, is really meant to capture what information we are looking to gather from applicants. And again, any materials we put out, I would just say check our website, masscannabiscontrol.com, for materials that are going to be posted kind of on a rolling basis, again with screenshots or guidance documents for applications. I would say for April 2nd, for that Monday, I'm inclined, and I would, I guess, seek the commission's feedback on this, to open the system not at 9 a.m., but probably noon, to make sure that we are equipped in the office and able to go and take any questions that will come in. Again, just really with an eye toward being responsive to potential applicants.
Other questions about this?
Sean, could you talk a little bit about how, and without going into, I think, too much detail, because my understanding is that there's still some processes that are kind of being talked through, but how the review, I guess the sort of the timeline for review, given that we have a statutory 2-week period, and then I guess, in other words, if you're submitting an application for certification on April 2nd versus someone who might be submitting it on April 10th, sort of the treatment of that and what that process will look like.
Yep. So I think that's a great question, because we've gotten some questions around if the application for certification closes on the 15th and I submit my application on the 15th, do I still get certified? The answer is yes. We will not that you will get certified, but that your application will be processed. That is going to be, we'll be processing applications on a rolling basis, depending really on volume. And so we are still a small team here at the commission. And so if you apply on April 2nd, it will essentially go into a queue, which will trigger it for review at various levels. So one is to make sure the application itself is complete, to identify or review the materials submitted, to then say it's an R&D, to share that information with DPH and confirm or certify that information is accurate, and then ultimately making a recommendation to the commission for this batch or this cohort. The staff would recommend approval. And then that is certainly your discretion as to whether or not to approve that. Again, the economic empowerment piece is a bit, I think it's going to require a bit more review from the staff level to just ascertain, one, are 3 of the 6 criteria met? Are 3 or more of the criteria met? And I should also mention as well, I apologize for not mentioning this, one of the last steps in the process is to identify, and it's really for our own information, to really identify what might be coming through the gate during the application process, is to get essentially an informal survey of what types of licenses are you intending to apply for. It's not a required field. It's simply to help us understand the volume of licenses we may get, or also the variety of licenses that may be coming through the door. So, and I apologize for failing to mention that. On the staff level, we're working through now, really divvying up that workload and making sure that we can give adequate review to both cohorts, and alternating our review and making sure that economic empowerment applicants and RMDs are getting kind of a similar review. I do think, again, the RMDs are going to be, from a process standpoint, might be a bit more simplified, but I also want to make sure that we're efficient in sharing information with DPH, that it's not simply as we get an RMD applicant, picking up the phone and calling someone at DPH. Instead, I'm looking for an efficient system that might be a kind of a daily download to DPH. They verify things and send it back in a real organized way. And so from an internal staffing standpoint, I think the 6 criteria, there's going to be some verification that's necessary. And we'll have to devote the time and energy to whether it be reaching out to folks to verify information, reviewing documents to support one of the criteria. And I think that's going to take some time, and I think also some balance amongst staff to make sure that we are all kind of cross-trained on making sure we meet those.
So can I just interrupt for a second? There's more to the question that Commissioner McBride asked. We talked about this, but I think it's important to say this and get feedback from my fellow commissioners. Both for the priority certification as well as for applications that start coming in on the 17th of April, I urge you with counsel from our general counsel to think about the role the commission can play as staff. We are going to be ultimately in a position where we have to make decisions on staff's recommendations, so I know there's some things we cannot do in terms of the processing of applications, but to the extent that there are things that we can do to alleviate the burden on the staff, I just urge you to be thoughtful and creative about that with guidance from the general counsel. I can speak for myself, but I'm pretty sure I can speak for the entire commission on this. We're happy to pitch in any way we can because we know the workload is going to be pretty enormous.
We will absolutely take you up on that offer. I think to get back to Commissioner McBride's point as well, which I failed to answer, was if you apply on April 2nd versus the 12th or 15th. As long as you apply within that April 1st through 15th window, your application will be reviewed and certification can be awarded or granted from the Commission. And then when the application process itself for licensure opens up on the 17th, anytime you apply after that, whether you apply in May, June, July, any subsequent time, that certification will be honored as far as the priority. You will come to the top of the list in the queue, and what you will get is, when certified, is essentially a certification number. That information will be asked for during the application process, and also at the opening of the review of the application for certification, you're going to be asked to create a username and password. That username and password will be identified as a certified priority applicant. And again, we'll cue the system to make sure that you are identified as that during our review. So it's not necessary to get certification by the 17th, so long as your application is received. So the application process will close on April 15th. We will continue to review applications likely beyond that date.
So perhaps goes without saying that it would benefit folks to get in the certification application on the earlier end of things if you are thinking that you want to be applying right when we open up the process on the 17th?
Yes.
Okay. And then just to clarify, so when you are certified and you get your certification number, that number is going to be good regardless of whether you apply on the 17th or whether it's April 17th or it's October 17th. You're gonna come to the front of the line by virtue of the fact that you have the priority certification?
That's correct.
Okay. And how are we letting individuals who have been certified know that they have been certified?
Sure. So the system, the benefit of having this electronic system is a lot of things the workflow can be automated in a sense. The Commission will still need to approve an application for certification. What we can then do is go into the system, formally approve it. That'll generate an email that goes out to the applicant. So when we capture the information about the key contact, we do ask for the email address. We will also generate a letter to that applicant identifying them. So the content will be the same, it'll just be a different format, identifying them as that. And our system will also maintain serves as kind of a database that says this applicant was approved at this time by the commission on this date, and we will honor that. So what I would suggest is if you are thinking about applying for a license at some point during this initial rollout, I would encourage you to pursue certification if you are eligible, so that when you do apply, so you don't have to know, for instance, what type of license you're intending to apply for. We are going to ask that question, but mostly for our own edification. So if you may not have your kind of formal business information tied up currently with the Secretary of State, that's okay. You need to know who the key contact is, and if you're eligible for meeting 3 of the 6 criteria, I would encourage you to apply for certification, given that you do have the ability eventually, when you do apply and have that information together, to essentially to rise to the top of the queue.
Can I ask one more question? What happens if there is a determination that someone is not to be certified? Is there a process for an applicant to challenge that or otherwise kind of appeal that determination that they aren't certified?
So an issue worth considering here is if, for whatever reason, the applicant is denied, certainly you could appeal to us and appeal to the commission as well, I guess through us to the commission. And what we would mostly look for, the grounds for denial would be that you don't meet one of the eligibility criteria. If you can prove that you do in fact meet that eligibility criteria, that would be an action on that pending application. So our intention really is to work folks through the process. And so if we feel like we don't have enough information from you to make that judgment, rather than simply denying folks, we would reach out proactively and say, can you clarify this for us? So really, I would say our approach is really going to be to certify folks. We are going to encourage folks to supplement information, and our inclination is not going to be to flat out reject somebody. But if we do need more information, we will be in touch, and if it can't be supplied to us, we would unfortunately have to recommend not approving them. So, but we would exhaust as many efforts as we possibly can before doing that.
Thank you, and I just want to say I feel like this has been very thoughtful, again, in a very short period of time, and I appreciate the work that you and that Christine, Mary Alice, Cedric, everyone who's been involved, Dave, everyone who's been involved has put into really getting this together in a short period of time, so thank you.
Other questions?
I just want to echo Commissioner McBride's thanks, because I watched you all working very hard on this, and it's very, very appreciated. I had a question. Could you talk me through step 5 and the decision to make that optional? I just want to understand it.
It's optional in the sense that there may not be a disclosure, so if someone leaves that field empty, that's okay. We're looking for them to proactively identify conflicts they may have, but it's not. It's a kind of a text field, so if that box remains empty, you can move on the process.
Okay. But we do have an expectation that if they're aware of a conflict, they need to disclose
Absolutely,
it.
yes, and I think that the narrative text above that makes that clear, and I should also mention that when folks submit this information, we're asking them to certify that this information is true, and that they know this to be true, and it's also, I think, a fair warning that if information submitted here is eventually discovered to not be true, that is something the Commission needs to consider as far as the continued licensure or potential renewal of that license, that eventual license. So as many kind of, without drowning folks in text, we're trying to draw that out to say, when you hit submit, that you're certifying that this information is true, as you know.
Great, thank you.
Do you have something else?
I guess it's a bit of a follow-up on Commissioner Doyle's point, which is, this is a presumption that I had, but I want to make sure that it's a presumption of all of the commissioners. So when we say on here that it's a required step versus an optional step, that's just for this process. The optional steps here, when you complete a license application, are not going to be optional, right? I mean, these things that we have that aren't green, you are going to have to provide that information when you're filing an application, so it's just for this particular step.
That's a great point. That's absolutely true, which is when you do apply for licensure, we are going to want to know who the key people of that organization are, There will be the background check portion of that, as well as suitability, and so all those things will apply. What we're saying is, for the purpose of purely certification, we're not requiring this information at this time.
So it's fair to say that in the next week or two, that you'll have a flow chart comparable to this for the license application process, correct?
Absolutely, I would say comparable, but perhaps this one's messy as it is, and so I do apologize for that, or maybe not apologize, but I licensure is going to be not so much a more complicated or messier process. There's a lot more.
There's a lot more to it.
Information capture, and what we made, I think it's worth doing is, as the commission in your regulations has kind of identified the packet process, is perhaps walk
Do
through
it packet by packet.
just to organize it. In the
That makes sense. And so is that a reasonable expectation for next week or the following week? I mean, I know next week we got a lot on our plate, so should we say 2 weeks?
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions on this? Sure. Commissioner Tuttle?
Thank you, Sean, for your work on this. First, just a clarification, if an econ empowerment applicant meets 4 or 5 or 6 criteria, that does not give them more priority, correct?
You don't get bonus points. No, it does not give you more. It's not a higher certification by any means, but I think the intention there is to ask the question. And again, if there's 3 and 1, it might be kind of questionable, or we don't feel like we have enough information. If they've certified 4, I think it allows us to, with a much higher degree of confidence, to recommend an applicant for approval. So, but it doesn't give you a higher certification. Thanks.
Secondly, you mentioned that not all 6 of the criteria require documentation.
That's correct.
So just for clarity, so people don't leave here like, oh, I found a loophole, I'll just check all the boxes.
Yeah.
Those items will be checked later on in the process.
Absolutely, yeah. And so some of it is it's collecting demographic information, and there's not a lot of supporting documentation we can really provide for that. But it's also something the Commission, I guess, reserves the right to, I don't want to say investigate per se, but to follow up on and to certify that, one, the information provided is in fact true, but also that the documentation itself is accurate and valid as well. So there's a good chance if you do apply for if you fill out all 6 criteria, there's a good chance we'll be in touch with either somebody that you've provided or yourself to just follow up on things.
And then lastly, the Commission has talked about this, and we've talked about this, but because there's been some confusion lately about the alternating basis, could you discuss that process?
Yep, and so that's the Commission in the regulations as well. I think really in the context of licensure, especially the first kind of priority phase, is that we will look at an RMD application and then an economic empowerment application, RMD application, economic empowerment application. When we get to the point that there's more of one than the other, if there's not one available, we will continue to process applications. So it's not as if we're going to hold up anyone's application. It's more that we're giving both priority applicants a priority review, and not saying today we're only doing RMDs, tomorrow we're only doing economic development applicants. It's that in the queue, things will alternate, and when assigned to a staff member, things will alternate to make sure that we're getting to both in a really fair manner.
So no matter how many RMD priority applicants there are, that won't affect when an econ empowerment applicant is?
Not at all. But if in the course of reviewing there are, say, 15 RMDs and 10 economic empowerment, and we go through all 10, if an economic empowerment application comes in during the course of one of the review, we'll review that next, just to make sure we're getting to everybody in an equal, fair way.
Sean, I'm not sure that you've had a chance to think this through yet, and we have a little bit of time, but I'm wondering, have you thought about kind of the pace and timing of commission meetings? Are we going to do batch processing once a week, more than once a week? I guess obviously it's going to depend on the number of applications that we receive, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of how the staff will bring recommendations to the commission.
You're correct in saying I haven't thought about that too much. At the same time, I want to be efficient in the process and also not burden or overwhelm each of you. So I want to make sure you have a good enough amount of time to review any of those batches, but it might be based on volume, largely based on volume, as well as bandwidth for us to...
My concern, of course, is, aside from all the issues you just raised, which makes sense to me, the other concern is that since we're still beggars when it comes to public meeting rooms, I think the more lead time we can have to kind of schedule them, the better off we're all going to be, particularly if we don't want to end up in the Hurley building anymore. So, although I think that
Our friends at DMH have been
We
very
appreciate
kind
it.
and generous in allowing us to use their space.
yeah, and
As has the
thank you. That was a much better way of saying what I just said. But nonetheless, I
We
do
will
think
invite them
we
to
just
lunch.
need some lead time in terms of how this process is going to go, and so I'd urge you to give it some thought. But again, we probably can't make it explicit until we see the number of applications first.
I think that's true, and I would intend to collaborate with you and the commission
Okay.
on how best to sequence that.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments on this? I'll add my appreciation to you and the staff for getting us to this point and making me and I think the rest of the commission quite confident that come Monday we'll be in a good position to start handling the inflow.
I think that's absolutely the case, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank everyone that worked for the commission. This has been a monumental task and a complete team effort, and I've been very proud to be part of this process and very proud of the team we're building.
So you can all have sandwiches for lunch and then get back to work, okay?
We have work to do.
Anything else in your executive director report?
Not at this time.
Okay. Any other questions for Sean or the rest of the staff? Okay. I am not aware of any other agenda items that came to my attention after this agenda was published, so there being no further business before the commission, I'm adjourning this meeting of the commission as of 11:05 on Tuesday morning, the 27th of March. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, the next meeting, a week from today, same time, same place, 10:30 at Gaming Commission's offices. Thank you.